I really noticed in the UK just how miserable the country is. I've met a number of people who are older and they've said that it wasn't always like this. The middle class and the working class are the same. They really aren't. The difference in culture, the attitudes to life, the viewpoints.
This liberal elite middle class, they've now valued their status on compassion and caring about the little person. I feel like it's the little people of Britain who they just really do not care about.
The history of the working class in Britain being treated like shit is so blatant. It's not you living in your terraced house in Hoxton that is going to have to deal with the cultural tensions of bringing in first-gen migrants, migration from cultures that, as far as I'm concerned, just aren't compatible with the West. Brexit really was just a big fuck you to the political establishment.
Being a Brit yourself, do you have hope for this country? Okay, Olly Dobson, welcome to my podcast. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me on.
So where are you dialing in from today?
Yeah, currently in Rawai in the south of Phuket in Thailand.
Nice. Yeah, it's a lot more exotic than where I currently am in London, although at least it's not raining. So yeah, I found your content probably a few months back on TikTok and YouTube and really like what you're doing. So we're going to talk about a few different topics today, but could you just give my audience a bit of an overview of who you are and what is it you do?
Yeah, so I've got a few things going on, but I guess normally when people ask, I would say that I'm an entrepreneur. I run a coaching business focused on men's coaching, specifically around personal branding, self-improvement and accountability. But at the same time, I do a lot of content that would probably fit into social commentary. I've had a tendency to voice political opinions on social media, and that seems to be the area of content that I get the most traction on. So yeah, there's a few things going on there.
Yeah. Yeah, I shared a video of yours on Twitter last week, really not expecting much from it, just some of my followers to say, oh yeah, and then it went viral. I felt kind of guilty because it's not my video, you know what I mean? And that's when Lawrence Fox shared it as well. So yeah, I agree.
Irving as well.
Say again?
David Irving reposted it as well.
No way. Yeah. Well, yeah, everyone should check that out. We're definitely going to touch on what you said in it, but you know, you definitely have well-rounded, strong opinions, and you're very direct and to the point. I think you have a way of sort of summarizing, analyzing situation of what's going on. For example, if it's here in Britain, giving your 2 cents and then summarizing it quite succinctly, which is quite impressive. I'd like to talk about your views on Britain first. So
yeah.
I noticed your most viewed video on YouTube is called "How Britain is Completely Miserable." So, you know, you're obviously English yourself, right? So why don't we just expand on that a bit, on Britain being so miserable, what it was like for you growing up, and how are things now?
Sure. So this is an observation that I made primarily after moving to different countries. So I've lived in 5 countries, right? And one of those is essentially a clone of British culture, Australia. And over the last few years in particular, I really noticed in the UK just how fucking miserable the country is. It really is contagiously pessimistic and defeatist, anti-entrepreneurial, pessimistic. It's just a really unhappy culture to be around. And it also exhibits itself through other things in a good way, like our comedy, right? So our comedy is very self-deprecating and basically saying everything is shit, right? And the Scots are the worst for that because they've got it worse than anyone else in the UK, right? But, you know, that's an example of it. The culture in the UK, it is just miserable. And I think over the last 5 years or so, the UK really has started to go downhill, and it's just made that culture even worse. And yeah, you know, living abroad, I've seen it more and more. I've seen it around the UK. I grew up in Devon in the southwest, in the middle of fucking nowhere in the countryside. I lived in Leeds in the north, so the industrial working class heartland, but I also lived in London in the metropolitan liberal elite boroughs like Islington. And it's the same observation wherever you go. British people, they complain all the time. They're miserable. And that's why the Aussies and the Kiwis call us whinging pommies, right? It is in our culture. And unfortunately, it's not good to be around that. It's not conducive to good mental well-being. So I hope that summarizes it as succinctly as I can.
Yeah, I completely agree. And actually in Ireland, it's not too different. In fact, I think sometimes it might be worse how much people moan it. What's worse about Ireland as well is, not to diss it too much, but additional to the moaning, people are really gossipy. People are so talk about each other behind their back and stuff like that. But anyway, that's diverting from the point. Do you see this sort of mentality in the UK as something that's always been here, or has it got worse in recent years?
Yeah, so look, I'm only 26, right? So I base my opinions partly off what I've been told by older generations as well. And there's always going to be bias with that. But I've met a number of people who are older, and they've said that it wasn't always like this, in particular in the 1990s and the 2000s when Britain was booming. It wasn't this way. A recent example of this was I was in a hostel in Berlin over the summer, and I was chatting to a surgeon he was in his late 30s. And he was saying, look, this is not how the UK used to be over the last 10 years in particular. It's really fallen behind, because we're both saying that we'd seen how much further ahead Germany and the Netherlands were, these Northern European countries. Britain, in terms of just the visual, when you walk through the streets and the way things are, it's distinctly different, even in the summer. There's this thing that we say, Brits seize the sun and we go out and we have pints, and we do to a degree. But if you go to Germany and the Netherlands, it's on the next level, right? And at least they actually have a lot of shops open and all of these things. Their nightlife is still going. Whereas in the UK, we don't have that anymore. So I don't think it did always used to be like this, but I think Britain probably always has had an element of complaining. And without going too far down that rabbit hole, I would say that probably ties in with the last 150 years or so of the class system and some ideological social structures that exist to keep people in place, and why they just complain instead of actually doing anything. If that makes sense, what I'm alluding to there, essentially, people have basically been conditioned to accept life being worse than it should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, completely. I've seen some of your content on that class system stuff too, and it wasn't really something I had realized as much, I suppose, coming from sort of middle class Ireland. Because, for example, in the States, you get all different types of, income levels, but it's not necessarily as difficult for someone to cross from one side to another without having to be labeled as a whole new group.
Yeah. Yeah. So the American social class system is much more based around your ability to acquire financial capital and elevate your standard of living through that. Whereas in Britain, it's cultural. And there are still a lot of people who don't understand this, and they argue it. It depends. Sometimes it's ideological, like the Marxists will always say, oh yeah, it's two classes, the proles and the bourgeoisie, like the middle class and the working class are the same. Then fucking not. They really aren't. The difference in culture, the way the attitudes to life, the viewpoints, everything, the supermarket, your holiday destination, what you watch on TV, the music you listen to, all of these things, they're so complicated, and it makes the English social class system fascinating, but it is a lot more complicated. And with that, you don't have the same level of social mobility, because you could acquire capital as a working class person, but still be seen as a pleb by the middle classes.
Mm. Yeah, I think this is something that everyone who lives here just knows, but no one is really willing to describe. Because if you saw, when the election was happening, Keir Starmer, someone was saying, well, what is working class? And he said, anyone who works.
You describe yourself as working class. Sakir, define working class.
No, working class is families that, work for their living, earn their money through going out to work every day, not through other
Not
means.
middle classes do that?
Well, working class families have the ordinary hope to get on in life. I mean, this has been
Don't
the story.
middle classes have that
Yeah,
as
of course they do. Of course they do.
So what's the distinction?
People will say to me, "Well, look here, you've come a long way.
Yeah, but you went to state school.
Yeah, but that is the ordinary hope of the working class, which is to have a decent education, to get a decent, secure job, to get a car, to get have a nice holiday, to have
But
a
isn't
house.
that the middle class too, Sakir? Everything you just listed? No?
It is, yeah, it is, and that's why many people go on their life journey from what you might call working class to middle class.
And they said, okay, well, do middle class people not work? And he was kind of dodging the question, but I feel like all of us know it comes down to your culture. I think your accent is a really big giveaway, like what you do in your spare time, the kind of estate you lived in. I mean, to me, it's actually quite clear what we mean when we use those terms. Let me take this moment to say, if you guys want to support this channel and help me get more and more great content out to you, there's a few ways you can do that. There is a PayPal link in my description for a one-time donation. You can join the YouTube membership community where you'll get access to the Jack Jewell Uncut videos, or even better, join the Jack Jewell Uncut Substack where you will get my full, uncut, untamed, and unashamed takes, too controversial for YouTube, as well as articles and bonus footage seen nowhere else, including this episode. The native British white population may become a minority. Is it okay to be concerned about this? Is it racist? What are your genuine thoughts on Andrew Tate? The same line of questioning about Tommy Robinson. For any guy who's struggling out there, what would be kind of the first thing you say to them, or the top 3 things that you would want them to get on top of? Links are in the description.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the way that you talk is the single biggest giveaway of your social class, because if you're middle class, you will learn to speak with more received pronunciation, standard English. And the reason for this is because the middle classes culturally place an emphasis on being well spoken. So, for example, when I was at the dinner table growing up as a child, if I said something that wasn't grammatically correct or formal proper English, my parents would call me out on it and they'd correct me. I can give you a literal example. I grew up with a mixed social group where I went to school. My school was very, very mixed. In fact, it was probably predominantly working class, but I come from a middle class family, right? But I remember being around some guys and they were using a typical working class term for the plural of those. Working class, more like to say them. So let's say like those steps. They would say them steps. And I remember talking in that context. My parents were like, Oliver, for fuck's sake, that's not how you talk. Like, But it's those little things, right? The regional accent is generally the biggest giveaway. And you'll get that when you meet people. British people will immediately make a judgment on you. They will know exactly where you come from based on the way that you're talking. And it's something that I had particularly in the north, even though my family are northerners, right? And I've spent a lot of time there. If I went up there and I chat to a working class local, immediately, oh, you're it, posh, you are. It's like, no, I just didn't grow up in a fucking coal mine.
I mean, when I go back to Ireland, I get the same thing. We have the whole tall poppy syndrome thing, and I've been here a long time, almost 12 years. So, people find that threatening if I come back and they say, it's not even that I sound posh, it's just my accent sounds a bit weird. But you make me think of something here, which kind of ties into my next point, is that here in London, where I live, it is, as you described, very metropolitan bubble, sort of liberal, middle class, my social circles, I would say. There's a funny kind of sign here that, middle class people can have a conversation talking about which regional accents in the UK do they hate most. And they say, oh, I can't stand the Liverpudlian accent, or they say, I can't stand the Mancunian accent. But now, what they would never, ever say is, oh, I can't fucking stand Indian accents. They would never say that because that's racist. But the other two opinions are valid. And I very much see this as sort of, a representation of this liberal elite middle class they've now valued their status on compassion and being for lifting people up and caring about the little person. But actually, I feel like it's the little people of Britain, the native population, who they just really do not care about. And they look at them and they sneer. And there's no more of an obvious sign of the class system than that. Yeah. So just wondering, do you have thoughts on all that?
I would fully reiterate exactly what you're saying there. You know, I think behind closed doors, a lot of British people would say they're not fond of the Indian accent, but they wouldn't openly say it because, yes, they would be accused of racist because Indian people are brown, they're a race. But, you know, in terms of the part of the reason that people would say that is racist is because of the history of persecution of the Indians from the British, for example, with the Raj, right? But then they would completely overlook the even longer history of subjugation of the working class in Britain that still exists today, and the fact that the working class is your class, your social status is the single biggest determinant of your success in the UK, right? You know, you can look at someone like Kwasi Kwarteng, right? It's the most sub-Saharan African name you could get, right? But he talks very well spoken. He was the Chancellor, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Right. But you know, he's black, right? But he's significantly more privileged than your typical white working class man who's grown up in a council estate in, say, Jarrow or Jaywick, right? And this has been shown. You know, Douglas Murray spoke about this. The life expectancy of slaves in the Caribbean was greater than the factory workers of men in Lancashire, right? The history of the working class in Britain being treated like shit is so blatant. But as you say, the middle classes, they're silent about it because secretly they don't like them. A lot of them, they really do despise them. They see them as uncultured Philistines, right? And they don't care about helping them, and they despise their politics. They despise the fact that the working class are socially conservative culturally in the most part, right? They're actually the ones who are saying, no, we don't want loads of immigrants coming in because they're going to come into our communities. It's not you living in your fucking terraced house in Hoxton that is going to have to deal with the cultural tensions of bringing in first-gen migrants with a very different culture, right? It's not you that's going to be competing for the jobs. Traditionally, this is why, you know, Labour traditionally were opposed to the EU for protection of the workers because they don't want migrants coming in. And this is quite interesting, but it very much symbolises the state of the left that we have today in the West, is that they serve the interests of educated, liberal metropolitans. They are no longer the political wing that is meant to represent the working class. The working class are being represented by the populist right movements or the hard right movements, depending on where you stand and how you see it. But, you know, they're the ones that are actually getting the votes from in the UK, obviously Reform being the prime example.
Yeah, completely agree. And, you know, this was something I didn't understand. Moving here, I was never really too opinionated because I'm not from here. But when I heard about Brexit, you know, I sort of bought into this narrative from even just my family sort of having conversation where just the general assumption was Brexit happened because of racism, whereas there are so many reasons for and against leaving the EU. You know, take race and immigration out of it. You can talk about governing our own laws, trade, so many things like that sense of sovereignty. So, you know, for me, even though I feel like we haven't actually been delivered Brexit properly because of the people in power, they wanted anything but. For me, if we had to vote on this again, I would actually choose to leave in the hopes that we will get people who actually can deliver it as it should be.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I voted leave. I campaigned to leave the EU as well. I mean, that it was partly a reflection of where I was in my political leanings at the time as an 18-year-old, and I was going through a pretty right-wing phase that, on reflection, was probably more of a retaliation against my parents, who were pretty left-wing. But you know, even to this day, I would probably still vote to leave the EU. The stance I actually took with it was that I wanted us to stay in the single market. I wasn't bothered about the immigration side of things, but the political union, the lack of democracy, the general vision of the bureaucrats that lead the EU for this kind of federal European state, I thought was fundamentally at odds with the British way. And, Britain was always 1 foot in, 1 foot out. We were always a pain in the arse for the EU. We maybe it's because we were never successfully invaded and the rest of Europe had the commies, it had the Nazis. So there's more of that need for that unity. Britain, it's always been different. But I think although immigration was a big part of it, I think Brexit really was just a big fuck you from a lot of people to the political establishment, because they were so arrogant. A huge part of the reason we voted leave is because Remain was such a fucking terrible campaign. Like, whoever was heading up the campaign strategy there, just to push this arrogant, elitist method and thinking that the average person cares about things like the increase in import tariffs, like this kind of stuff, and then belittling them for the years after as well. I mean, oh Christ, the fucking Remainers after, and the protests, and these people who just dedicated their lives to standing outside Parliament. I actually went and met them as well myself. I did work experience for an MP, and I went and spoke to them, and they were just insufferable wankers. Like, I tried to have a normal conversation with them, and they were just so like arrogant and patronizing and rude. I'm like, I'm just trying to have an open conversation with you. And look, if you want to posture, like, I'm reading law at a Russell Group uni. I'm not some fucking idiot. Like, I can understand what I'm talking about here. But these people, they just didn't get it. And we keep seeing this elitism again and again. We saw it with Trump. We saw it with Trump again this time. It's a reflection of the left at the moment, the way that they are. They just do not understand. They do not get the picture that people are pissed off with the system. They're very pissed off with the status quo that we've got. And that is why they keep voting the wrong way.
Yeah, completely agree. I think I just wonder with hyper liberals or hyper progressives, because they are everything they claim to be. They're intolerant of differing opinions. They're actually quite racist when it comes to even now how we talk about white people or white men. I mean, they're prejudiced against large groups of people because of quite immutable characteristics, and they sneer down at people who don't think the same as them. So, and I feel this is what the Labour Party has become, because they used to be this sort of soft left, economically, socially conservative party that was for the little guy, the working guy. They've now just become totally, far sort of further to the left towards socialism economically, but then so hyper progressive that the people in office, like you said, that they are just out of touch. A scandal after scandal of hearing a politician who's been just saying the most disgusting things about one of their constituents or an old person, or, I mean, even in the time of Gordon Brown, like he was heard on camera. You're probably familiar with that audio where a woman was concerned about immigration, and then he said something like, "Oh, it's just some bigot." Like, someone said, "Who are you talking to?" So, I guess so. Leading on from that point, you talk about populist movement, hard right, and I think something the UK, to its credit, has always been quite good at has been being pretty balanced and civil when it comes to different political views. But I see what's happening here now is becoming more and more like it is in America, like increasingly divided, large pockets of social media and the demonization of the two sides, and also more extremes when it comes to opinions. How do you feel about this sort of populist revolt and the rise of Reform UK along with it, for example?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable given the circumstances that we've had over the last 15, 20 years. Yeah, I think in a big part of it is due to the economic inequality and the problems that people are facing. In the UK, you are poorer, right? Your standard of living is going down every single year, but you're still taxed to the teeth. And what the fuck do you get for it? What do you get for it? So everybody's poorer, they're worse off, and that makes people angrier. But I don't buy into the argument that if that was fixed, there wouldn't be any other problems, right? I think that there is also the fact that there is mass migration that has come in that we didn't ask for. And then you've also got the very real problem now of migration from cultures that, as far as I'm concerned, just aren't compatible with the West. I mean, look at what is going on in Germany, right? It is just terror is now the norm there. And people have been silenced on this. They've been told you're Islamophobic, right? To be scared of a religion that has persistently caused violence and war throughout its entire existence and still does to this day. But you're told that you're phobic if you say that, if you're racist, if you say that. And people can see this fragmentation and this conflict. And not just that with the Islamic community, also just the general fact that we've got all of these different cultures now, and we're told, oh yeah, diversity is our strength. But how is it? You can just see that there's this segregation. Oh yeah, it's our fault. We didn't integrate them properly. Well, is it really? Britain has always been a very tolerant country. Throughout our existence, we've integrated. We've always been like that, whether it be the Romans that came in, right? Well, granted they invaded, but the things that we've absorbed, right, over our time and the people coming in, we have accepted them. I don't think it's us that is the problem, that this area in particular, immigration, we've been told you can't talk about it because you obviously you're racist or Islamophobic. If you have concern about a progressive Western country allowing in large numbers of people who abide by a religion that is very conservative and most of its morals are in complete opposition to what we stand for, these kind of things. And people are sick of that. They're really sick of it. The crime rates that are going up as well, all of these problems. So you've got this combination of economic problems, social tensions, politicians who we know despise us. They hate us. They don't serve in our interests. They're just an elite who are serving themselves. So obviously populism is going to grow as a result of that, because the populists are the ones that are saying, yeah, we're going to cut your taxes. We're going to be stricter on these immigrants who keep causing problems in our society. We're going to shake up the political system because we're not part of it. Now, whether they actually will or not, whether that is genuinely what they'll do, I'm very skeptical of Farage's real intentions. But, regardless, if that's what they're saying they're going to fight against, obviously people are going to vote for them because they need fucking hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one thing I thought of there that's quite funny is this elite class who don't care about us, which is why populism is occurring, which really just means when the majority group feel unheard, unlistened to, and unrepresented, and then they need to have some sort of insurgency to overthrow the main establishments. And what's funny is that then Keir Starmer will use the term populism as a pejorative, as an insult. Yeah. So it just proves his point. He says it as if it's a negative thing, which is literally just proving the point that he's someone sneering down at people with these views. Exactly.
And that's the thing, is that people are just starting to own it now. These things, they're just starting to say, well, do you know what? Like, I'll just accept it. If you're repeatedly called racist, okay, maybe I am a racist because I have concern about mass migration, particularly from cultures that don't mix well with our own. Maybe I am transphobic because I don't want prepubescent children to be given hormone therapy. Maybe I am Islamophobic because I feel scared about the fact that innocent civilians are persistently being slaughtered in the name of a religion. It's this idea that all these things, that they're phobias, right? Look at the origins of the word, right? An irrational fear. It's not a fucking irrational fear. These things that are going on, it's a very rational concern that people have. And if you persistently belittle them and tell them that they can't think that way, you're going to cause that tension and people are going to bubble up and it is going to come to an exploding point. But what that is in the UK, I don't know, because like you said earlier, Britain has generally been quite moderate. We've never been too prone to revolution. The only revolution we did have was in the 1600s. We got rid of our king, replaced the king with a dictator who was basically the king, and then brought the monarchy back in because we couldn't hack it. It's like Britain's always been slightly soft, but you saw what happened last summer. That for me is probably a boiling point. Brexit was kind of a release of steam. So yeah, I don't know what's going to happen, but civil unrest, we're very close to it. We are very, very close to it.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, when I talk in front of a camera about this all the time, it seems very conceptual, but then to actually envision someone I know being part of a terror incident or a riot, you know, that's a whole other story. It feels a lot more real. And you know, you touched on Islam there, which I'd like to kind of talk about for a second, because being on X especially, you know, it's kind of shocking sometimes to see. And I think being critical of a religion is just totally valid, and we should all be able to be as critical about an ideology or idea as we want, you know, in a free society. But obviously, we have this kind of concept of when things get bad, we sort of find an enemy, you know. So, for example, with the Jews in the past, or even now, really, with what's happening on the streets and everything with these Palestine protests. But the more I look into Islam, the more I'm understanding issues within that religion. But then a part of me is still sometimes quite nervous that, you know, are we going too far with this in terms of demonizing a group because we're angry and we want someone to blame? But then one thing you said was, oh, it's our fault for not integrating them. And I agree that that's bullshit. But I think the grain of truth in that, in terms of our establishment class, so, you know, the judicial system, police, politicians, I think if you welcome Islam into the country, for example, if this was a decision we were making now to begin, you could do it. You may not really have these communities mixing much and being friends, but it's still possible to have, you know, law and order, no terrorism, civil society, if you have a zero tolerance policy towards any aberration from what's considered appropriate. So, for example, you know, in Saudi Arabia and the UAE, I wouldn't want to live there. Their cultures are not the same as ours. But from my understanding, they have stamped out the fundamentalists and the radicals. And we even have individuals in this country who are banned from those countries. So I think an issue that we've had is that politicians as well, they've viewed Islam as this kind of homogenous thing. And it's actually very offensive to moderate Muslims to say, oh no, we must not criticize rapists because that's going to offend Muslims. You know, if I was a moderate Muslim, I would say, what are you talking about? Like, I'm not a rapist. Like, criticize the rapist. It's not going to offend me. So I just think the way that we've handled Islam has been an utter failure. And I think it could be possible to live, you know, in a civil society if we, you know, if we're deporting everyone who breaks the law, if we have zero tolerance policy towards blasphemy laws, stuff like burqas, Sharia councils. There's a lot we could do to actually improve social cohesion, although it doesn't necessarily mean the two groups are going to be happy families all the time.
Yeah, with the policy side of it, I'm very unsure how to approach it because, yes, as you say, right, obviously the majority of the Islamic community are peaceful. However, statistics have repeatedly shown that around 15 to 20, 25% are more prone to radical political Islam, right? Sympathetic to acts of jihad, and jihad as a concept can mean various different things, right? It means to struggle by way of Islam, but as we understand it in the West, a lot of the time it's jihad through conflict against those that threaten Islam or attack Islam. You know, they see it as the one group. For example, you know, the attack on Palestine, that is an attack on the community as a whole. I've forgotten the term. I think it's Ummah. I can't remember it exactly. But, you know, there are other things even on a more moderate level. I don't know where we're at now, but there was a study that was done in 2014, I believe, by The Guardian or Channel 4. And it found that 50% of the Islamic community in the UK believed that homosexuality should be a criminal offence, right? So there is a very distinct conflict of values there. Islam as a religion is conservative and it stayed true to its values. This is why you've got the internet Islam, where you've got these young lads who are going to Islam, they're converting to it because Islam is actually based in its opinions, right? And it's not like the Church of England that just doesn't stand for anything anymore. Even the Catholic Church, right? You know, as an Irish person, right? Even the Catholics have started to accept things, right? But Islam hasn't in the same way. It is a lot more strict, and Muslim people are a lot more strict to their values. And you can see this with the young people. Like, I lived in Leeds. I lived on the edge of an area called Hare Hills. I don't know if you saw the riots there.
The riots. Right? Oh, wow.
In a very Pakistani and Afro-Caribbean area. Right. And again, look, obviously the majority of them are peaceful. They're chill. They're just getting by with their life. But the values that they share, they stick to. So they don't drink, which makes it harder for them to integrate in the UK because it's such a big part of our culture, right? They don't agree with things like homosexuality, gender equality. And you'll notice with a lot of the young Muslims as well, they are more likely to stay in the faith, whereas Christians are more likely to fuck it off. Right, they're more likely to leave it. So you have a large population of that. And if you have a large population of a culture that is very contrasting to the native culture, there are obviously going to be tensions there, because particularly when it's a religion, these people, they believe that it is the word of God, right? It's based on faith. It's not based on logic and reason, even though they will come up with reason and logical arguments, even though it is used as a way to justify the fact that they're making a faith-based decision. These people, they're very strict in their beliefs, and that's how religion works. You can see it in America with the Christians, right? This is just how the Abrahamic religions in particular are. They have very high levels of social control. If you leave the faith in Islam, what is the punishment? Death, right? And a lot of Islamic countries, they have that. In law, apostasy is an offence. You're taught that you need to convert people, that there is them and there is us, the kafir, or kafir, I can't remember exactly how you pronounce it, right? They're the others, the non-Muslims, and they are not seen as equal. They aren't seen as the same. So if you have that in a culture like the West, which is more focused on the rule of law and the separation of church and state and tolerance and liberal values, there's going to be a conflict. And the other thing that you said is also true. When you actually look at the Islamic countries like Saudi, the UAE, these Middle Eastern ones, they say, yeah, we're not taking these people in. Right? Why? They literally said, why are you taking them in? The Saudi guy that plowed through the crowd in Germany, you know, Saudi said to the German government, this guy is dangerous, right? But for some reason, we've let them in. And I would guess it is, again, because of political correctness and fear of criticizing this group, because it's been pushed over the last 20 years that you cannot criticize this religion. And that's not how things work in the West. All religion is open to scrutiny, but this religion in particular, a lot of its followers are very, very against it being criticized, to the point that there are a minority who will always respond violently. And we've seen this time and time again. And this is why I have this concern, because I'm like, how do we manage this without demonizing the majority of that community, but recognizing that there is a very real problem with the minority there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a scary thing to think about and try and think of a solution, right? Because, you know, it's all great living in a society that wants to be kind and accepting, but people don't understand that quickly becomes a weakness. And I think in all of these conversations, I'm just starting to see the West and the UK in particular as really lacking strength and political will. So much to the point, I feel like people have been brainwashed or sort of swayed so far towards this way of thinking that they see someone like Trump come into office, whether you like him or hate him, and he says something like, you know, I want to protect the American citizens by deporting illegal migrants and migrants who committed serious offenses. Now, that would once not have been controversial. And then you have fucking Selena Gomez on camera just acting like it's the worst thing in the world. And someone hears Trump come out and say something, and they're so used to people mollycoddling them and never going too far that they see that as dictatorship. They see someone just enforcing a political will, being a strong political leader who is going to put his foot down and say, I'm doing this for my country. That whole concept, you know, for our generation, it's almost like that's not even a thing. So I think it could be possible. Let's say we have this huge revolt, reform gets a majority, and they actually deliver on what they're saying. It would be possible to get a political class that says, no, we're not going to listen to your slanderous accusations of racism, Islamophobia. These are the policies we're putting in. Deport, like you can no longer wear the burqa. All of these Sharia councils are being closed. Very common sense things to basically make sure all of us are being treated the same. There's no two-tier policing.
Yeah.
What I worry is that even though they'd be quite popular, the hyper-progressives are going to have an absolute hissy fit. Like, they have gotten their way for so long that these policies and these ideas to them are going to seem like a complete miscarriage of justice towards a group of people. So that's what I'm worried about.
But what are they going to do, the hyper-progressives, other than cry and make cringe TikToks moaning and giving themselves another self-diagnosed neurodivergency as a result of this fascist policy that's just come through? Like,
maybe. I mean, but I don't know. I mean, do you know that guy recently that was, I think, Luigi something? He killed the CEO of an insurance company. Yeah. And then you have all of these progressives just being so happy that someone was murdered. And that to me has given me like a small insight. The whole concept of socialism says, if you're looking at true socialism, is that the underclass and the working class are going to have a revolt and uprising and actually murder the aristocracy and everything. And now you have some youths in the West who are so indoctrinated into this far left thinking that they can see someone murder a CEO and for them it's just for the greater good. So that is one thing I'm seeing, that, you know, sure, we have all the blue-haired freaks on TikTok, but I just wonder if they're pushed far enough and they stop getting their way, are we going to see violence from them? Because we do have stuff like Antifa and BLM who have got violent, you know?
Yeah, you know, it's possible it as much with the right, but generally I would say pushing the far right more is something that's going to be more problematic. You know, if we look at terror attacks in the UK, the majority of them have been from political Islam, but then the others have been from the hard right, like Thomas Mayer murdering Joe Cox. Look at Norway, for example, Anders Breivik. That was a hard right thing. I mean, the Saudi guy in Germany, his was an anti-Islamic motivated one. Then there was the attack in Christchurch in New Zealand against the Muslims. So it's normally like the far right tend to be the ones that are more likely to take violence. Antifa, I know that they're more of a thing in America, and obviously in America it can be more problematic because they have access to guns, whereas in the UK there's less of it. It's highly possible, and it would be stupid to be complacent and say that they're not going to do anything. But at the same time, I would generally say that I'm not so scared of the woke left taking action, because most of them are fucking pussies. They're pathetic. They're weak. They're weak people. They're just narcissists who spend all their time inside screaming on TikTok, but they have no balls. They have no courage. Stand the average woke person up face to face with a man in a fight. They're going to shit their pants. Right? And, you know, they're not intimidating people. The problem is just that their ideology has had social sway. It's been able to influence that. That's where the threat from them comes from. It's not the threat of the physical violence that the hard right have relied on, and traditional. If you look at like the Bolsheviks did, you know, these were fucking hard working class Russian men who just lived a life of shit all the time, and they were tough. Right, and that's why they revolted violently. But now you've got like some blue-haired twat with a rainbow in their bio, and like I said, 3 self-diagnosed neurodivergencies. What are they going to do?
Yeah, no, totally. I think you may be right there. And yeah, it's funny how we pander to this, because I think for a lot of these people, if you do ignore them, they eventually go away.
Yeah.
So I guess in summary, sort of, and being a Brit yourself, do you have hope for this country?
It's a difficult one. I would say by default, at the moment, I don't have hope, but there is an element of of hope there. There's times when I think about it and I actually I feel sad. I really feel sad. You know, like I am patriotic. I love my country, and living abroad and experiencing more of the world has taught me to appreciate what I do like about my country and national identity and the pride in that. And part of me does want to have hope that we can make things better. But, you know, if we just look at things in terms of how societies and countries go, it's really common for countries to go up and then down. Britain was the greatest power in the world. It's had its heyday like that. You see it with other empires as well. And there is an inevitable decline with what goes up. And I'm not saying that I want us to be like we were with the British Empire again, right? But, you know, there is an inevitable decline that comes with that. Whether we can make something so that we aren't so much of a miserable country, that we aren't so unequal, that people can have better jobs, they can get paid better without having as much tax, there's more social cohesion, whether that be because we manage to integrate people better, or we, you know, whatever it is, or if we get firmer and we say, actually, no, like we're going to be stricter, we're going to be more homogenous, whatever it is, if we can have more social cohesion and economic power for the average citizen, then that would be great. And I do hope that can happen. But in the next 20, 30, 40, even 50 years, it's hard to see it happening, man.
The one thing that gives me hope is how many people understand the problem and want it to change and seem to care. Now, whether that is able to, you know, overcome the blob of the civil service and everything like that, I guess we'll see. But watch this space. Honestly, Olly, it's been such a great conversation, and you know, I'm just a few years older than you, but for a 26-year-old man to have so much depth of knowledge on all these issues and to thought about it so deeply, I think it's such a great thing. And I really, you know, I really assume that you must inspire a lot of other men who really need this. There's not much of this out there. It's such a void. And yeah, I look forward to seeing all the great things you're going to be doing. So how do people go see more of this killer advice from Olly?
Yeah, so I'm active on most socials. I'm on YouTube. It's just Olly Dobson. I think it's an underscore before it, Insta_ Olly Dobson. I am on TikTok as well. I tend to just shit post and put my ideas out there, but I would recommend not using TikTok. Like I said, I'm on X too, but YouTube and Insta, even LinkedIn, they're my main focus. I don't know if you can put the apps below in this or on screen after you do it, but yeah.
Oh yeah, I'll put all the links in the description or the show notes, whichever format you're listening. So yeah, Olly, it's been so great. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, Jack. No, thank you. I've really enjoyed being on this.